listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
How can you be the freest country in the world when you lock more of your own people in cages than any other country in the world? The lesson of 9/11 should have been to never fund another young rebel group in this part of the world again. America started as the smallest government in history, and it's become the biggest government in world history. At the end of the day, it's all about freedom.
Here's your host, Dave Smith.
What's up? What's up? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. I am joined, as always, by Robbie the Fire Bernstein. How you doing, brother?
Welcome. Happy post-Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's right. It's the day after Thanksgiving as we're recording this, meaning we're all farting a bunch. I love Thanksgiving.
That's the best.
Just the best holiday. You don't have to buy anyone gifts. You just got to eat. God bless Turkey Day. Did you have a good time?
Dude, I love Thanksgiving because it means I get to go home, I get to hang out with the family, and I don't have to go to synagogue. So that's perfect.
Oh yeah, that's right. I didn't even think about
like
that. There's no religious.
None of that. It's just all family. Dude, I had a good double day. I'm gonna be honest. I woke up because we do lunch for Thanksgiving. So my mom made like this unbelievable
So you have lunch
chili.
and then a dinner?
No. This is what I mean by a double day. I got hammered at lunch. I chilled with my grandfather. Ate some chili. Ate a whole bunch of pecan pie. Passed out. Then I went to LOL, 9 o'clock, started drinking again, double day.
Okay. So you guys just do like an early dinner, basically.
Yeah, it's great. Love it.
Yeah. That's usually my family do a pretty early one, too.
Thanksgiving brunch.
Yeah. Well, I went to my girlfriend's family's place, her aunt's place for Thanksgiving. And I met, part of her family that I haven't met yet, like her aunt's wing of the family. Very cool people. But, so I got this double down thing, too, because we did a Thanksgiving on Wednesday with my family, and then we went and did Thanksgiving again with her family. I wish we had a third family. I just want to keep piling these meals down.
Who did Thanksgiving better?
Well, to be fair, probably her family did, but they had a much bigger thing. We just had, a few people at my mother's, and they're these Italians, man. Those Italians, say what you will about them. I mean, they're all a bunch of inbred retards, but boy, can they cook. Boy, can they cook. I'm just kidding. I tease the Italian community. But Bill Marmy. I kid the Italians. But yeah, anyway, it was a lot of fun. Goddamn, just eating and drinking like crazy. Those guys, those Italians, they drink. They drink quite a bit. Yeah. And even the Jews. The Jews don't mind you getting sloshed over a meal, even when it's like a religious holiday. Right? You didn't get hammered with the Jews.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm saying you were talking about getting drunk with your, your religious family. That's never a problem for them.
They might be religious, but they drink.
Yeah.
They got no gripes with that one.
I think Muslims are the only religious people who, at least of the major religions, who just don't partake of that.
That's why they got all these problems in the world.
Sure. That's why we're bombing the crap out of you people. Too goddamn sober.
Trying to teach you guys to drink. And then I did a gig in Connecticut, which my dad showed up and I didn't bomb, so that's always a win.
Not bombing
in front of the family.
In front of the family.
Very
is
important.
Definitely a good one.
Very important.
Yeah, that I can fully understand. Nobody wants to bring their family out and watch them just die a horrible death.
No, because you put your whole life into this, and if they show up and you do bomb, they're being bad parents if they don't tell you to go try to do something else.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want to have like Tom Hanks in Punchline and start whining about shooting a deer or something like that. But he was supposed to be like the strongest comic in that movie, and then his parents show up, and he's like, "They wanted me to kill the deer, and I didn't." You're like, "Get yourself together, you maniac!"
None of those stand-up comedy movies are ever good.
Yeah, I did like Punchline for some other things, but it's like the worst part of stand-up comedy movies is the stand-up.
Yeah.
Like, it's like Tom Hanks will sit there and he's like, "No, you can't do that joke. That's hacky. Here's some real stuff." And then it's just a nightmare of hacky. I remember the... you ever see when D.L. Hughley was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Will tries to start stand-up, and then the whole point of it is they're like, "Hey man, stand-up is a craft that you have to master," and then D.L. Hughley gets up there and just does the hackiest bullshit ever. It's just the worst. And they're kind of like, "Yeah, that's how you do it." But hey, what are you gonna do? Stand-up comedy ends up becoming a theme in a lot of those sitcoms because their writers are all made up of stand-ups. So they end up bringing that into it somehow.
At some point, they realize they got nothing else to write about.
Yep, that's right. We are limited. All right, so for today's episode, I thought we would spend a good chunk of time talking about net neutrality, because that's been in the news for the last couple of weeks, and the head of the FCC is talking about repealing it. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. I sure hope it does, but I'm skeptical about it, especially when you just see the relentless campaigns against the repeal.
I mean, are you against a free and open internet, Davey Smith?
Oh yeah, they always got to use
these fine words: free, open,
yeah,
neutral.
They always have to steal our fucking words, man. You know, I talk about that like with the examples I always use are like voluntary compliance is what the IRS calls your income taxes. It's the most involuntary thing imaginable. And they go, it's like voluntary compliance, just, you know, or you go to jail. It's, you know, it's a mugger should start using that when they mug you. It's like, we would like some voluntary compliance of your wallet. And yeah, of course, if you ignore the gun to your head, then yeah, I guess it's all pretty voluntary. But if you don't, it's the opposite. And the other one I always like to point out is Operation Iraqi Freedom. And there's a million other things like that. They love our language.
It's crazy how unrelenting they are when they won't give up a lie. Like, I read a little bit of that New York Times Magazine article you were talking about, and it's crazy. They just would not admit that they had bombed his house. It's like, yeah, I was fucking there, and someone missiled it. You guys are the only people with missiles in the area, and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about, buddy.
Let me take a look at those pictures. That could be a strong wind. I don't know.
That looks like... Were you guys putting something in your microwave? You know you can't put metal in your microwave, right? I mean, we told you that, didn't we?
The old classic thing. What was it? One of the old popcorn bags? Those are stovetop popcorns. You can't microwave those.
That's on your uncle.
We found pieces of a drone nearby. You know, coincidence? That was a different drone. That was sent. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And that you know, it's just whatever. I love what they call it, the intelligence community. That nice community of people. I mean, it gets really, really hard to believe after a while if you look into this shit that they're just always wrong. You know what I mean? Like that they're not trying to lie. They just constantly keep getting it wrong. It's after a while it becomes pretty obvious that it's like, oh yeah, they lie. They're liars. That's what we're dealing with. So there's so much propaganda that's just complete bullshit around net neutrality, and as you were saying, you know, keep the internet free and open, and oh my god, I mean, I'll try to go. I know we did an episode on net neutrality a while back, and I apologize to anyone if we do, you know, repeat some of that stuff on this episode. I'm sure we'll keep it somewhat different because as you guys know, I don't work off a script.
It's not our fault it's back in the news.
Yeah. No, it's sure. Well, at least it's back in the news for somewhat positive reasons.
I mean, if those politicians had just listened to our last episode, we wouldn't have to talk about it again.
Could have repealed this thing a year and a half ago, baby. Or whenever it was, 6 months ago, something like that, we did it. But, you know, also, because of, you know, the way the Gas Digital Network model works, these episodes are now behind the paywall, and a lot of other people were asking about it this week, so I do want to go over the topic. But like I was saying before, like, I don't, you know, I never do these things scripted. I rarely even take notes into the podcast with me. I just kind of, like, read up on the stuff I'm interested in, and then I come and rant and rave to you good people. So, I mean, so much of the... Like, I think what hurts me all the way to the soul of my being, what just destroys me, is the idea of... Because there's a few different of these concerns that people believe net neutrality is necessary in order to address. And what we're talking about real quick just with net neutrality is the FCC. I mean, net neutrality is kind of like an idea, like a principle that the internet should be free and open, and you shouldn't be allowed to, selectively charge for or block certain websites or these other. But in reality, what it is the FCC reclassifying the way they regulate the internet from Title I to Title II, which lets them regulate it as a public good or a public utility. And the head of the FCC is proposing that we repeal that change, which was made by Barack Obama in February of 2015. Okay, now what I was saying hurts me to my core, and it really does. It just, it hurts my soul. Is that in the name of worrying about essentially freedom of speech being suppressed, right? So one of the big concerns that's put out there is that, well, what if internet service providers, known as ISPs, what if they were to discriminate against certain websites? Like maybe some unpopular website somewhere, they wouldn't want you getting access to that site, right? So in the fear of censorship, young people are saying we should bring in the FCC. I just let that settle for a little bit. That in the fear that these private companies will do something that nobody's doing. Nobody was doing previous to the net neutrality laws that went in 2015, and it is just not happening. There are no unpopular websites that you're not able to go to. And someone out there, I'm sure, will find some little example where one time one company did this. But I mean, come on, guys. Has anyone ever had the problem of you're trying to go to a website, but your internet service provider is blocking it from you? Come on. Now, let's contrast that with the FCC's track record. Have they ever tried to block content? You still can't say shit on the radio to this day. Can't say fuck on the radio. That they are the ones who actively suppress freedom of speech and censor people, but yet we're going to call them in. And the fact that you could get young people and comedians calling for the FCC to regulate the internet. I mean, goddamn, what type of fucking Orwellian world do we live in where you want to call in the FCC in the name of freedom? How do young people and artists particularly not get that they're the bad guys, man? These are the bad guys. Why would you want them to be involved in this at all? And then the other thing that really fucks with me, and this is really why I just hate the left, and what it just infuriates me is that, like, no matter how beautiful something is and how much it helps humanity, all they ever seem to see is like the greediness of capitalism, and then they just call for governments to regulate. It's all they ever seem to see. Now, I think the best example of this, all right, is that over the last 30 years, let's say, you've had probably the greatest, since the Industrial Revolution, the greatest thing that's ever happened in humanity, okay? The greatest thing that's ever happened in fucking humanity has been happening in Asia. And what's happened essentially is that a billion, with a B, a billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. Okay? A billion people out of extreme poverty, which I believe is classified as $1.25 or less a day. All right? And a billion people have been able to escape that in Asia. It's incredible. It's like the greatest thing that's ever happened. And how often have you heard a left-wing person bring that up? I mean, these are the people who claim to champion the powerless, who claim to be all about, their big issue is like inequality and the plight of the working class and all this other nonsense. And I'm asking a genuine question here. How many times have you heard a left-wing person bring this up? Because I'm betting the answer is zero. Like, never. It never comes up, and it's for one specific reason, because what did it was capitalism. And they cannot ever give capitalism, free markets, or corporations any credit for anything. You have the most beautiful freaking thing imaginable. You could not conceive of something more beautiful than that. And what does the left talk about? Huh? What do they talk about? Carbon emissions. Climate change. As Bernie Sanders said, the number one threat to humanity is climate change. It's going to make the world uninhabitable for our children and grandchildren. So in this fucking mindset, the most anti-human mindset imaginable, this has been a bad thing. This is a bad thing. That China isn't, is that they're not fucking, breaking records for democide like they were under Mao, and now their people are actually being able to, get factory jobs and pull themselves out of this brutally oppressive, to borrow their word, oppressive poverty. And not a word about it. It just seems to be a negative. And what do we call for? What do we want? A global carbon tax. What do we want? We want a Paris climate agreement. We want all these different things to make sure that we lower these carbon emissions, which are the reason why 1 billion people have pulled themselves out of extreme poverty. Let me tell you something. Those carbon emissions are great. They are great. And thank God China's fucking polluting their air the way they are. I'm on team people. And I think people being pulled out of extreme poverty is nothing but a positive. Absolutely nothing but a positive. Or at least the positives far outweigh the negatives, if there even are any. So, this is what you have, and you have examples like this all over the place. I mean, another one that I love to bring up is Walmart, which leftists just hate. Walmart goes around, and this is no exaggeration, okay? They go around to the poorest, most rural communities in America, okay? Where, again, all these people, these leftists who claim to champion these people, and that's who they care about, right? Well, Walmart goes into these neighborhoods and slashes prices. I mean, not like cuts prices by 5%. We're talking slashes prices by 30, 40, 50% on silly little things like clothing, okay? Things like, literally, they go in and to the poorest areas in America and let them get their like clothes and toiletries for a fraction of the price. And not one compliment out of the left. Not one. If a government program were to go into those areas and do that, they'd never shut up about it. But because someone's making a profit off of it, and it's a big corporation, they're just evil. They're evil. And all the focus goes on, they should pay their workers more. Well, how the fuck do you think they managed to cut all those prices? Okay? It's a process. And if you want to pass on, if you want to be able to undercut all of your competitors, then this is what you do. At least this is how they've figured out a business model to do it. And by the way, in the free market, if you got a better way to cut costs for those people, get at it. Go for it. Except you don't get to just sit there and bitch. You actually have to go create a company, which if you've ever met anybody or been around anybody or yourself have tried to create a company, you'd know pretty fucking hard. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of risk. A lot of risk on your part. But all you hear about, if is not one word from the left about like, clothing the poor. That was really cool of you. Oh, Walmart, donating clean water to those kids in Flint, Michigan. That was pretty cool of you. No, what do you hear? They put out the mom and pop shops. They put them out of business. You dummies. Walmart doesn't put anyone out of business. You know who puts them out of business? Their customers who stopped going to the mom and pop shops and started going to Walmart. Man, does the left need to check their fucking privilege? For all the times they love to rattle that off to everybody else, you guys need to check your fucking privilege. So, no matter how beautiful something is, you give it to the left, and they find the horror in it, and then, of course, the next step is always, and then the government should come in and do this. Like, I wouldn't give a fuck if they were just bitching about it, if it was just a bunch of privileged kids bitching, whatever. But with the Walmart thing, what does it come in? Oh, we need to raise the minimum wage. Oh, we need to make them do X, Y, and Z. It's always through the force of government, right? So no matter what, it's like, who in their right mind, if you had any sense of humanity and history and what human beings have been through and how hard life has been. Like, life is fucking hard and it's gotten so much easier, man. So much easier. I'm sitting around Thanksgiving dinner the other day. I was talking to my girlfriend's grandfather, who's 93 years old and still going strong. And he was a World War II veteran. He was in the Navy. And he, some of his stories were kind of reminding me of some of my grandfather's stories, who's no longer with us. He didn't make it to 93. But, he's telling me about his childhood. And he was one of 9 children. One of 9 children. And one of his siblings died. I forget what it was, but got some illness, that we've managed to cure, or at least probably no one really deals with, or prevent or cure. I can't remember what it was. But this basically broke his mother, seeing one of her children die. It's kind of a tough thing. And she broke, and she had like a nervous breakdown afterward. And the father's left with the other 8 kids. He can't raise 8 kids on his own. So they all end up in an orphanage. This is their life. He got into the Navy because you could eat good there. He'd never had food like that before. So he got into the Navy. And then so after escaping that, then he gets World War II, seen tons of friends of his, got killed. The ship, he was telling this one story where like there were these 2 ships and they were supposed to go first and the other one was supposed to be behind them. But then something about the way they pulled out, the other ship went in front and then they were following that ship. And then that ship got torpedoed in front of him. And this is like from his, perspective. He's like, I was supposed to die there, man. That was supposed to be my life. And he had a fucking really hard life, man. And so did his other siblings. Some of them, I think, had it even tougher. And there's just like no appreciation for how much better we have it, how good we have it. So you have this kind of, this, and even just people in like my parents' generation, most of them had way tougher lives than we have. And then their parents' generation, like the one I was just talking about, way tougher. And man, if you were to talk to their parents' generation, they probably had it way tougher than that. And this has been human history, man. And then you'd look at someone, right? If you keep any perspective of that shit in your mind, and then you look at somebody who is a 20-year-old in America today. You're like a 20-year-old in this age. And let's say you're going to a college campus, you're a college kid. You're basically not only you get all this first world stuff, you get the benefit of not having to have a hard life like any of those people did at all. There's no draft, you're not like forced to go into this shit. You're like the privileged amongst the privileged amongst the privileged. Like in the vast scope of human history, you are the 0.0000001%. All right? And you go to a college campus where literally they go, hey, most people through human history who went through all this misery, at your age, they were either in a war or they were doing some type of back-breaking work, like really fucked up, hard lives. And here's what you get to do. You got 4 years where you just go figure out what your dreams are, what you want to be. We're going to surround you. We're going to pay for your, you're going to basically get it covered. We're going to pay for your living, for your studying. Here are all the great books that have ever been written. Just go read, man. Learn how to think, develop who you are as a person. Like, oh my God, it's just the most amazing thing you could imagine. And what do people on the left see there? Oh, there's a sexual assault epidemic. Oh, these kids are oppressed. All of them are out there like, you're not respecting my transgender rights, There's just no appreciation whatsoever for the most amazing fucking thing ever. So, leading into the net neutrality, and back to just on the college campus stuff, and of course, what's the next step? Oh, we need to get the government involved. We need to have the Department of Education, insist that that every woman's, accusation of rape gets a guy kicked out of campus. There's always that next step. It's always the next fucking step. It's like you're a fucking child. You're such a child. You're so fucking privileged that and you can't see any of that. And then, of course, what do children always need? They need parents, and so they call in the government to come do their work for them, because none of them can fucking do a thing for themselves. So, again, look at the stuff going on in Canada that Jordan Peterson's been fighting up against. It's that these kids feel like if you don't adopt 72 different pronouns, that you're fucking oppressing them. My God. Hey, go talk to some people in my grandfather's generation. Like, get a fucking reality check. So, with the net neutrality thing, I think it's pretty obvious what the beautiful thing is here. It's the fucking internet, man. The internet is the most beautiful thing that has happened in the world. I mean, it's right up there with the stuff I was talking about in Asia. It's incredible. It's the greatest equalizer in human history. I mean, genuinely, the greatest equalizer in human. Now some kid who couldn't fucking afford to go to college can sit down at YouTube and be right in a Harvard lecture. He's right there with them. All the information in the world is on your fucking phone, man. Like, what an unbelievable thing to have. What an unbelievable thing, man. I've had my life changed by people on the internet, because you can get like every writer, every thinker, everyone. They're right there, man. And what is it that the left sees with this? They see greedy ISPs, excuse me. Greedy internet service providers. And of course, what's the next step that they always follow? Well, now we got to get the government in. Now we got to get the government in to regulate this shit. So the fact is, man, there'll be some people, and certainly, listen, I sympathize to some degree with people who have complaints about their internet providers. I'm sure we've all had some complaints about our internet providers. I'm sure people have complaints about, cable companies and different, which a lot of them are all, mixed up in this business too. And I do agree to some extent there is a problem with the fact that in a lot of different ways, the federal government, state and local governments too, have fought competition. And they've, in a lot of ways, given, quasi-monopolistic powers to a few different companies. And of course, we should all be together in getting rid of that stuff and allow as much competition as we possibly can. However, that is not what involving the FCC is going to do. Of course it's not. I mean, once you bring the FCC into this equation, now it's a huge advantage to all the big companies because they can afford the compliance, the cost of compliance, and they can afford the army of lawyers to keep the FCC off their back, and of course they can afford the fucking lobbyists to try to get the FCC in their pocket, as many of them have already done. So. But regardless of any of these little problems or these one examples here or there that you could maybe cite of a company being kind of a shitty company, look at the big picture, man. Look at the fucking big picture. Before net neutrality, okay, before the FCC reclassified the way it was regulating the internet, before February of 2015, for decades, what was happening with the internet? If you have any sense of the big picture, it was nothing but it was becoming more accessible and like vastly more accessible and vastly faster. Like extreme, like huge improvements. And was this happening? Who was this happening for? Just the rich? Just the wealthy? No, man. It was happening for ordinary people, for the poor. It's the greatest equalizer in human history. And of course, none of that beauty is what the left sees. All they see is the potential for wicked capitalism, And the other thing that, the left never seems to understand is that this idea of wicked capitalism and fucking over your customer every chance you get doesn't work so well. I've heard a few different people because I've been posting, a little bit on Twitter and stuff like about how much I hate net neutrality and how much I just hate the FCC getting involved or any part of the government getting involved in the internet business, particularly because I see the internet as kind of like, the last bastion of hope and the last, the final like tool of resistance against the state, which, Hillary Clinton knows all about. And I've gotten some of this, some people arguing with me, and one of the things that has been cited a few different times is they'll kind of like talk about internet service providers and what they've said, like what they've said they want to do, or what they write about, or what their plans are. It's very rare that people, because there's really just not too many examples of where they've actually done something. And this is the same thing. It just reminds me of the antitrust stuff. It's like if you were to when people talk about these companies like Standard Oil, J.P. Morgan's company, and I talk about them like they were they had all this plans of being a monopoly, and it's true if you listen to what J.P. Morgan said. Like if you listen to what he said, he did have this plan of trying to monopolize an industry. But if you actually look at what he did, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit because what happens is these people, they don't have some great understanding of economics. Typically, they have an incredibly great understanding of their industry. So they get their industry. And yeah, like JP Morgan, a lot of these other companies, like a lot of different companies had a similar type of thing. But the plan essentially is to undercut all of their competitors, to put them out of business, because they realize, like, through economies of scale and things like that, they're like, well, we are a big company. We can afford to do this, right? We can afford to undercut all of our competitors. And then once they're all out of business, we can jack up prices. Like this is the scheme, and this is the whole justification for antitrust. The problem is, if you go back and look at the actual historical record, which I'd really recommend highly. Tom DiLorenzo's done some fantastic work on this over at the Mises Institute. And he's actually gone back and looked up all the records, which nobody else seems to care to do. But it never happened, man. This idea, what did happen was undercutting and driving out your competitors. And then every time they tried to jack prices up, what do you think that did? It just drew more people into the industry. It drew competitors in, because all of a sudden they go, oh man, there's a real big profit margin here, and now I can undercut these guys. And they'd come in with new equipment, new technology, and lower prices, and right away, the big companies would have to lower their prices back down. So essentially, whatever their plans were, all they could end up doing was saving their customers money. And of course, in this period of time, the average lot in life for the average person improved in a way that it had never improved in human history before that point. And, that's irrelevant, but what did J.P. Morgan say? That's what ends up, getting brought up. So all of these, the idea that you have, Netflix or something like that, right? Which accounts for, I haven't seen numbers as recently as this year, but I remember, I think this came out in like 2015. One study said that Netflix was using 35% of the bandwidth in the internet. Like that's how much, Netflix takes and how much they were watching. So the idea that there's all these people who love Netflix and all these people like Netflix, and you're going to like fuck them over, or you're going to try to price gouge them or whatever. It's like, okay, so you're going to piss off all of your customers. You think that's good business? Like, of course companies want to make as much money as possible. Same way you want to pay as little as possible. But it's a dance, and you meet somewhere in the middle. And so, it's like you got to play these things out in reality. And the truth is, right, that while there's not as much competition as many of us would like to see with internet service providers, but even before 2015, it was getting better. It was getting better. Like so many areas went from having one to having two. And that's a big deal. Just that is a big deal in terms of competition. So, Verizon, for example, came in and started giving, internet service. And then people could at least choose between, going with their cable provider or this other option. And believe me, if there's at least two, right? If one of them starts being horrifically bad, it's a big opening for the second. Now, the other element of this that's kind of interesting is that high-speed internet originally came in using basically the cable infrastructure, okay? Now, for years, and this goes back before high-speed internet, right? But for years, the FCC was fighting against the cable companies on behalf of the good old, antenna bunny rabbit airwave system, and the FCC ended up losing in court. But just an interesting little fact: if the FCC had won, we'd never get the high-speed internet that we'd had today. And so, you know, the idea that that they're now the ones who need to come in and regulate this thing. I mean, all we're going to end up doing is preventing the next innovation, and that's kind of the best case scenario. Now, this guy who's the head of the FCC, who wants to repeal net neutrality, this guy, I think it's Pai. It's Pai is his last name. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. But this guy is you know, he's a believer in free markets. I saw him. He spoke at that Reason Awards event that I was at a couple of weeks ago, and this guy is not. It's not like that. He was reading Murray Rothbard or Milton Friedman or something like that, and this converted him. What happened was he just got into the world and saw how much better the market does at innovating than the government does at regulating, and then I think he started reading some good people, and he's just convinced that this is what's going to lead to better innovation, and this is what's going to give people a better product. So, you know, I think this guy is a force for good, but he's facing, you know, a lot of backlash. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Yeah, I think that's where he's most spot on, and one of the biggest points of this is imagine how laughable it would be to walk into a government office and try and explain to them, hey, I'm the tech guy. I got this radical idea for how we can improve the internet. And they're like, well, we really got to sit down and analyze this. And then it's like by the time they come back to you and like, yeah, that was actually a great idea. It's 8 years later and irrelevant. Yep. Like, they're the last people you want involved. If things will continue to improve. That's right.
And of course they were. I mean, I don't understand how anyone can, and this is the argument that all the net neutrality advocates can't really respond to. But you go, so why is it in the 10 years, say the decade before net neutrality, right? Why wasn't this evil shit happening? Why was it that internet access and speed was just improving for ordinary people? You know? Like, why is it that before they had these regulations, so many of these greedy ISPs didn't start doing all this shit then?
There's also something really scary to me that if you build a business, you build a product that's so incredible that it becomes widely adapted, that it reaches a critical mass where we go, since everybody's using this, the government better start regulating it. Like, in other words, what you're looking at here is, and probably there's some monopolies involved into why these companies are the ones that laid down all the wires and all whatever that is, but you got a couple companies, they put in the investment to have this infrastructure that can provide you internet to your home. So they built that business. That's their business. It's their product. We purchase it from them. They did the work, and then all of a sudden they got this working infrastructure, and it's like, well, now that's important, so government better be involved. Like, why? That just sounds like the mob.
Right. And of course, before... So before, this is an excellent point. I completely agree with you. And before these net neutrality regulations from the FCC, right?
They were killing it.
Yeah. Well,
they got us porn. They got us movies. Yeah. They got us information. Everything you'd ever fucking want in life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And there's something interesting that, like, okay, so the idea that they're going to start charging based on, you know, what sites you're going on, it never made any sense, and they never did it this way because it's just illogical and impossible. There's like 1 billion different websites. There's all this stuff out there. There's no way to start ciphering out whether or not you're going on a good blog or a bad blog or this or that. I mean, for these companies to start doing this would be insane. So how were they charging? Well, the same as they are under net neutrality. They charge by the bandwidth, which is a completely reasonable way to do it, right? So Gas Digital... they pay a bunch more than I pay at home for my internet. Okay? And they do that because they're using a ton of fucking bandwidth that I'm not using at home. Like, I just want to watch Netflix, and they have a whole, you know, a podcast network. So they pay for it. I mean, what's the issue with that?
Yeah, the other thing, I'm sure this came up the last time, is that it's in the internet's best interest. Like, if you're Verizon and you put down the infrastructure for the internet, you want the next great best thing to exist on the internet. because people pay you to go to the internet. You know, like, so it's like you're not going to start stifling the competition of new businesses to come around. You want the new businesses to come around because if the next great thing is on the internet, well, then you profit off it.
Right.
It's like look at the YouTube model. YouTube, anyone in the world can dump content up on YouTube. I mean, I guess they'll start like policing you for PC shit, but for the most part, you know, like they're not trying to make it easier for Fox to create television for YouTube than me in my living room. They don't give a shit. They just want people to go to YouTube and watch the best possible content.
Right. They want whatever draws in the most people.
So the entire internet is that way. Don't be fooled.
Yeah. And of course, like, even when there are little examples that people can point to of one of these things, it's like usually if they're done on any type of large level, there's some reason behind it. So I know one example was that, and I think this was years ago. I can't remember who this was. I believe it was Metro PCS. But they basically said that they said, like, with their internet on their phone plan or whatever, you had unlimited YouTube, but you didn't have unlimited I don't know, like Netflix and some other things like that. And the reason was because it was easier to compress the YouTube files. You know? I mean, at the end of the day, bandwidth is a scarce resource. And it's what economists call a rivalrous good. You know? There's only so much of it. And so, okay, so this is the way it's got to work. It's like when people would, you know, I mean, things have changed a little bit now, but when people would, like, go onto Wi-Fi in their home so they didn't have to use up their data. You know? It's like, okay, so we have to adjust to the conditions of reality. That's part of life. And I don't think there's anything, like, I don't understand. I believe I did use this example in the last one that we talked about. But so, like, with Hulu, I forget exactly what it is I'm paying, but I think it's like $8 a month or something like that for a Hulu account, but you get commercials, and then you could pay more. So I pay like $12 a month or whatever it is to have commercial-free Hulu. Which is essentially I mean, it's the same thing as slowing down or speeding up, right? Like, the commercials basically just slow you down from watching your program. So I pay a little bit more to get it quicker. I don't get what the problem with that is. And again, you could sit there and try to make out this thing like, oh, so people who have money don't have to deal with the commercials. Like, how unfair is that? That just because someone has less of an income, less disposable income, they have to have a slower Hulu process. And it's like, okay, listen, life isn't fucking fair, all right? And you're missing the big picture, which is that we used to all have to sit down and watch television and sit through tons of commercials. You know what I'm saying? You now have this fucking ridiculous library in front of you with all of this entertainment. It's still better, even though it's not as good as the rich guy has it, it's still better than ever. You know? Like, you could sit here and be like, oh man, this rich guy's coming to the supermarket and he's buying nothing but steaks, and I'm working class and I got all these kids, so I gotta suffer with hamburgers. You know? But you're missing the point that you're not starving. You're missing the point that food is plentiful. And this is what free markets do, okay? When you have a scarce resource, you need a pricing system in order to see how to allocate those resources the best way. Now, the other thing that I find, you know, kind of interesting about all this, right? And this is why I kind of brought up the stuff with China and the people being pulled out of poverty all across Asia. And this stuff is that you no matter how beautiful something is, they always call for the government to come in, and they never give capitalism any credit. So if you actually want to say, hey, where have any of these nightmares that the net neutrality proponents are projecting, where do they actually happen? Have they ever happened? And if so, where? Well, the truth is yes. Okay, yes. There have been serious violations of freedom of speech and freedom of thought on the internet. There have been people, there have been cases where the internet sites that challenge authority are blocked, okay, where certain books are banned on the internet, right? And where are these things? North Korea, China, Venezuela, places like that. And it's precisely because the internet has, the government has control over the internet. Precisely because of that. It's right up there. It's right up there with guns to authoritarian regimes to control the internet. And it's not a fucking coincidence. I'm sorry. You want to talk about this nightmare scenario of the market with almost no examples of it. But the nightmare scenario of government, I can point to all of human history as examples of this. It's not a coincidence, man, even right here in the US of A, it's not a coincidence what the government wants to get their hands in and what they don't. Okay? So the government's never been like, oh my God, we need to regulate shoes or something like that, right? They're not dying to do that. They're not dying to regulate these things that aren't seen as important by them. Although, of course, in some of those other socialist countries I named, they do. But the government in America, right? What have we always wanted to regulate? Well, it's like they want like the post office, the schools, the television stations, and the radio stations, right? Like they want the centers of indoctrination and the centers of communication. And the internet has been the great out because now people can get real information. And of course, there's bullshit information too. And you see what's going on. You see how much the government hates freedom in the internet. They've tried forever to regulate this shit. They're always trying to get bills through, but they couldn't get it through, which they tried with SOPA and PIPA and those bills. They tried to just blatantly regulate the internet, and they couldn't do it that way. So now they have to do it through the FCC in the name of fairness and openness and freedom and all this fucking bullshit.
On that note, you got to think about some of the stuff that over the last 10 years, governments really kind of lost their grip on. I would think the best example would probably be kind of marijuana and drug laws.
Right.
I mean, the only information you heard about marijuana as a kid, other than the fact that we were using and enjoying it, at least I was, was, hey, this thing's going to, like, that was the only information you got, is, hey, this is going to kill you, and then a bunch of people being like, they're a bunch of lying idiots. But now you get a ton of great information, which has to play into why there's so many states that are legalizing it. Like, prior to the internet, you probably wouldn't even seen as much news about the success the states have had that have legalized it.
Yeah, right. And it's put a tremendous force on these guys where they can't ignore it, and they have to talk about it a little bit because otherwise they'll be seen for the bullshit artists that they are, because everyone's like, well, we see this right here on the internet. I mean, look, if you want to look at this stuff, like the whole drone war, right? The drone war, where we're going around just murdering people in countries there's never been war declared on. So the official Obama position on it was, we don't talk about it. They wouldn't even deny it. They wouldn't talk about it. There's no time. We've played this before on the show, but Jay Carney, I believe it was, their press secretary at the time, admitted this later, that he was told he couldn't talk about this at all. Now, how did the drone program get outed? Well, some fucking journalists, some people in I think it was Yemen originally, got grainy Nokia cell phone video or pictures of a drone. And then the internet was able to spread it all around, and that outed this shit. And that's why they don't want to do this anymore. And that's why they're so worried about this. You know, when they're talking about all this stuff like, oh, the Russia was able to buy ads on Facebook or whatever and all this nonsense. Look, man, what really fucking happened was WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks. What could WikiLeaks do if there was no internet?
Yes, that whole Snowden thing, we would have never known that information.
That's right.
What other examples would you point to as like radical? Like, I know for myself, I wouldn't have come across libertarian thought prior to the internet days. I came across George Reisman from the Mises Institute talking about dollar diplomacy, all sorts of interesting stuff. I remember when I first came across it, I was like, can I quote this in a paper? Am I reading like some crazy conspiracy theories here? Like, how come I've never heard of these Austrian guys? I'm taking an economics course.
Right.
I don't even know if I can quote these things. So I definitely, my thought was radically changed by having that information available. But what would you say, like, nationwide was accepted? Nutrition, for sure. Nutrition's taken a big change since the internet.
Absolutely.
Just like general knowledge of health and carbs and... But I don't know, like, what else?
Look, the biggest one to me that I see, right, is that there's a lot of opinion polls that demonstrate this. But if you look at people who go, if you ask people, do you believe the government works for the people or works for corporate interests? It's like over 70% of people who say it's corporate interests.
Right.
It's like people get it now, in a way that they did not before. I do not think you would have. I mean, there's polls to back this up. People did not feel that way before. Look, man, there's a reason, right? When people are like, they say, whatever. So, like the public schools, when the government controls schools, but there's a reason why those motherfuckers never teach you about the evils of war. They never. It never comes up that our CIA is over there poisoning drinking water and overthrowing elected governments and killing innocent children. You know what I'm saying? That shit doesn't come up. What comes up is what great men the presidents were. They don't sit there and tell you, like, oh my God, all these businesses have done so much. Like all these different people who started companies have done so much to help people. This is what truly improves wealth. No, they tell you how a bill becomes a law. It's all this fucking
dumb
state.
video.
It's state worshiping. It's the religion of the state.
Yeah, the other ones that I would say have taken a hit, religion's taken a hit for sure. I would say, like, drug information. I would say that's taken a hit. What are the other ones that are, like, just revolutions in thought? Probably to a negative. You have a little bit of this college liberalism and microaggressions and that nonsense.
Yeah, but that's
I don't know how,
at the universities, man.
I don't know how prevalent that really is, because every adult I talk to, like, doesn't buy into that. So I don't know who really...
I think that's completely... Yeah, I think it's completely backward to say that stuff spread through the internet. The truth is slapping that shit down is what spread through the internet. The truth is that the internet's what exposes all that shit. The internet is the reason why Jordan Peterson can go out and he's making $60K a month on Patreon or whatever, because there's a lot of people who are like, no, we want a professor who has the balls to tell the truth. If it wasn't for the internet... He just gets, fired from the university or brought up in front of the Human Rights Tribunal, and that'd be that. So no, I think it's quite the opposite. I think that radical leftist thought is protected, and then the internet is what's there to undermine it. So look, I mean, I think there's a million different things like this, not to just mention the things that we might not find quite as valuable, but that I think there still is a lot of value in, and the fact that, like, people learn all types of skills. I mean, if you, like, just YouTube alone, the amount of, like, how-to videos, they're all over the place.
Skillshare, baby.
Yeah, Skillshare, even better than YouTube. But, so again, it's just, it's like the greatest equalizer in human history. The tyrannical governments all over the world try to control it. And there, I just think there's so much downside to allowing the government to come in. And then on top of it, it's the fact that it's not even like Congress is passing a law, but we just allow these unelected bureaucrats to come in and basically write laws. So the FCC is just going to tell people how they have to provide their service. It's completely like It's completely antithetical to democracy and freedom.
Yeah, and just to play off that, like, we've all worked in some office or, like, been in school and they just put one schmuck in charge of something, and you're all like, oh, that schmuck? Like, you just know he's going to fuck it up. And so the concept of, like, that government, you could have one guy, he spends his whole life in government, he's just kind of a prick, and then he's just in charge, and he gets to decide the rules, and he doesn't care if he's pissing off everybody, and that's the fear of it being an unelected official. It's just one schmuck gets to make all the decisions.
Oh, and it's unbelievable. If you remember on the episode that I had Ron Paul on, and this is actually an example that I had cited. I think I brought it up and I had cited this on the podcast before because it's just really fascinating. But there was someone, he was like grilling the Fed chairman or something like that, and a congresswoman on the banking committee, came up to him afterward and goes like, you kept saying this thing about the gold standard, but aren't we on the gold standard? And you're like, holy shit, like. Don't think that there aren't really, really incompetent people who are put into these positions of authority. I mean, the fact that anyone in Congress wouldn't know that, let alone someone on a committee specifically about this issue. I mean, this is what we're up against. So your thing about some schmuck taking over, I mean, this is reality. This is the reality we live in. It's all such a fucking mess. But there's something about, it's so Orwellian, this idea that we need the FCC to come in to protect freedom. Whew. And of course, to whatever extent that there are problems with ISPs, it's almost always because they're government created problems. And this is, of course, how the road to government control works. Is the government, has a regulation, it causes a bunch of problems, and then they say, well, we need a regulation now to fix that regulation. And that regulation causes a bunch of problems, and blah, blah. And this is what so many people openly talked about with Obamacare. So Obamacare is going to create all these problems, and then we can come in and finally get universal socialized health care.
But do you remember there used to be that, like, there were even videos of it, but the FCC shits on everything? That used to be like a quote. Like, I used to just hear people throwing that around. I mean, that was back in the radio days, but that was the thing.
Yeah.
Like, people just, there was an understanding. The FCC sucks.
Yeah.
Fucking Christian lobby.
They're
like,
they're the fucking government censorship wing. And why the fuck do we want the government regulating communications? It's absolute insanity. And then the other thing that happens that I just, it drives me crazy. And I know I've brought this example up a few times before, so I apologize to people who I'm being repetitive, but I really do think it's worth bringing up, and I'll explore a couple new things with it. But, I talked about that guy when I was doing the Dave Smith On series, and I did one on big government, and I was in Central Park, and the YouTube commenter was going at me, it was like, oh yeah, what a hypocrite. Like, he hates big government, but he's in a public park right now. And I was like, I'm not a hypocrite. I don't think I should be forced to pay for the park. But since I am, I'm going to go use it. I don't really think that's hypocrisy. You know what I mean? Like, it's my park now. But anyway, but he said the thing, and this just really stuck out to me because it's not just me picking on one stupid internet comment. It's the fact that this is what permeates every anti-free market argument that I ever hear. It's like these boogeymen scenarios. I always say this when there's like a libertarianism debunked article or video or something like that. You're like, okay, just take away the insults and take away the boogeyman stories of this is what it would be in the free market, and then listen to what the actual argument is. And almost always by that point, there's nothing left. But so he goes to me, he goes, yeah, well, if this was a private park, if you tried to do this on private property, first off, you'd have to pay off, the owner, and then he would demand a portion of your proceeds for the rest of your life, and blah, 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 and like all this nightmare scenario. And then I just responded with, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting story. Here's the reality. I did 3 videos on private property. This is how it happened. I used the stoop of one of my neighbors. I went up to him, and I asked him if it was cool if we shot a video here, and he said, sure, no problem. Like, that's the reality of private property, and your nightmare scenario is completely invented in your head. It's just completely invented. So there's all this stuff where people, and you can do it. It really does resonate, particularly with people on the left. But it resonates with like this, like, it's got this plausibility to it, right? It's got this plausibility where you're like, oh, well, if somebody owned the roads, then they would say, you can't pass through this road unless you, give me $1 million or something like that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, well, people are greedy and they own the road and you need it. So what are they going to do? But of course, then you start pointing to people, like, there's lots of private services that we all need. Why isn't this happening? Because markets actually are far more complex than these anti-free market people like to make them. Okay, so one of the things with the net neutrality that people start saying is that, like, well, someone like, say, Google, if they're launching something to compete with Netflix, well, they're going to start slowing down Netflix. And using their service, or if there's an internet service provider that has some service that's competing with Netflix, well, they're going to direct you to their thing instead of this thing, because that's their competitor, right? That's the way that it would work. Of course, this is all utter nonsense. They used to say, I remember Ralph Nader and people like this. They used to say that you'd never see consumer reporting on network news because they need companies as advertisers, right? So they're never going to do consumer reporting on the companies that pay them. Now that sounds kind of plausible, right? Like the idea of like, oh yeah, that would be a conflict of interest there. But no law was passed that enforced them to do this. This is what they were all advocating, that we pass regulation, and it never happened. And consumer reporting took off anyway. They started doing it. And it turns out the market's a little bit more complex than you think. And the truth is, if there's something fucked up with one of their advertisers and say ABC News never says anything about it, then they get outed as being the fucking frauds that they are. And it's more valuable to them to be seen as a legitimate news source than it is to ignore that shit. So they fucking did it. And lots of different stations have run, negative stories about their own advertisers. So, again, it's like, it would be easy to sit here and say, Google will never link you to anything from another search engine, or Google, nothing of any of their competitors will ever come up. But it's not true. Go Google that shit. It comes right up. Go Google Yahoo. Yahoo comes up. And the reason is because it's more valuable to Google to be the best fucking search engine. Because if they're limiting it, then people are not going to use Google as much. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the market works in all these different, but like very complex ways that it's just much easier for people to jump onto these nightmare scenarios. And it's just, it's not reality based. It's really not reality based. And again, if any of these, it's like it's not in any company's interest to just fuck over their consumer. See, unlike the government, companies are actually slaves to their customers. They really are. I mean, the whole thing I was saying before about how Walmart put the mom and pop shops out of business, that's because the customers said we prefer Walmart. And that's what customers can do to you. They can put you the fuck out of business. Now, with the government, not at all the case. You know how many people know the war on drugs is bullshit and evil? Tons. It ain't stopping, though. It sure as fuck ain't stopping. You know how unpopular these wars are? Very. They're not stopping. Now, Princeton did this study a few years back. I forget, it was like around 2013, something like that. But Princeton did a study, and they basically concluded that America is not a democracy nor a republic. And they concluded that we're an oligarchy. And they would just go through this as a study where they basically say, well, like, here are these policies that the majority of the people want. Here's what these special interests want. Man, who do you think ends up getting their way? Special interests. And I go, here are these, these limits that the Constitution has on authority, and here's what these special interests want. Who gets their way? Special interests. So we're really not in any meaningful sense a democracy or a republic. I mean, what the hell is the Constitution even doing there, really? I mean, you got Obama and Trump drone bombing American citizens. I mean, try to find a constitutional justification for the president executing an American citizen with no trial. There's no way. I don't care what type of mental gymnastics you do. There is no way you can say that is at all consistent with the Bill of Rights. Oh, but he said something that we didn't like. Or okay, sorry, that's not enough. It's like, it's just not, it doesn't matter. None of that stuff has anything to do with anything. So now take a look at the big picture, okay?
Dave Big Picture Smith.
Dave Big Picture Smith.
Most consistent motherfucker you know.
Those are my trademarks. But in a free market way. I've never actually gotten a government trademark. I yelled trademark out the window. And I'm hoping everyone else in the market will respect that. So the big picture is this, right? The internet is the greatest thing ever. The internet has improved dramatically in terms of speed and accessibility for decades before net neutrality regulations came in, okay? The internet is the biggest threat to the government that really has ever been created. And authoritarian governments recognize this very quickly, and they have created hell on earth for a bunch of different countries, and shutting down or controlling the internet is a big part of that, okay? This whole North Korean thing, that there's no way that could keep going with an open internet. There's no way. And they know that shit, and that's why they shut that shit down. Okay, so you have that in place, and then you realize that our government, who's been doing a lot of really evil shit, and they were able to keep this under wraps for a long, long time. And now, because of the internet, they no longer are. And then they're trying to get, in every way they can, their filthy, evil claws into this beautiful beacon of freedom. And when you actually see all of this for what it is, how the fuck can you support the FCC coming in and regulating internet service providers? I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Now, let me tell you, this guy, Pai, or whatever his name is, the head of the FCC, I don't think he's looking at things the way I am. I mean, I don't think he's not some Rothbardian, anti-war, hater of the state. I think he just sees things in terms of a more basic in terms of economics and innovation. And he goes, look, here's what you guys want, right? You want these internet service providers to provide better services, right? And he goes, well, right now, because of these new regulations, they're spending a ton of their capital and resources on compliance. So what is that doing except taking away from their ability to innovate and create and provide you with what you want? This is what does... Listen, man. Innovation, freedom, and competition is what fucking improves things. And this is very, very true with the internet, okay? All these people who are like, well, think you have to be some fucking tech expert in order to understand that the FCC needs to get the fuck out of this game. It's not true, man. And the fact when Verizon came in and started providing internet to people, there's very clear evidence that they improved the speed of the cable internet too. Because the cable internet had to improve to keep up with them.
On that note, because I think you're 100% right that if you're trying to put...
That's why you're here.
If you're trying to invest money into compliance as opposed to innovation, that doesn't help anybody. Now, with that being said, this Pai guy either got into this position or he's taking this stance. I think it's all a lobbying game. I think the money of the cable companies is now larger than the money of Netflix, because Netflix is actually big enough in the market that they're not as concerned to lobby. I think Google stayed out of this fight. And I think everything we're seeing now, and this is true of like the AT&T merger fight, this is all just lobby money.
Oh, listen,
that's all it is.
Listen, I happen to think, and this is just because I heard the guy give a speech and I'm sizing him up, I happen to think this guy actually believes that stuff.
No,
but
so I'm saying I could
be wrong.
No, but I think he probably got the job because of whatever lobby money is behind Trump, and that's why Trump goes, hey, I'll take this guy.
Listen, there's no question. The proponents of net neutrality have been able to, and this is what they do with all these government regulations, but they've been able to create this idea that it is... you have corporations on one side, you have lobbyists on one side, and then on the other side you have like the people, But really, in reality, it's different corporate lobbyists against other ones. It's like, it's not like Netflix and Amazon and Google are these like mom and pop shops. These are big, big companies, And the truth is that, that's always how this shit is. That's always how they're, FDR was portrayed as this anti-Wall Street guy who was like a traitor to his class. But the truth is he was just, representing certain banking interests and going and attacking the other ones. And there's a pretty good book called All the President's Bankers, if you want to read that gets into some of that shit. But so that, that's what you're dealing with here, man. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. There's no question that a lot of people who, at the particular time when the regulation is going to fuck them over, they put money to lobby against the regulation, and then the person leading that charge uses like the language of freedom to try to get the regulation repealed. But of course, yeah, and so I'm sure there's a lot of truth to that. But at the end of the day, it's all about freedom, as I like to say.
I'm on to this Pai guy, Dave Smith.
You're on to him?
I'm on to him.
You're going to bring him
Walking
down.
around with some name like Pai up to something.
Well, I got to be honest, that's a fair point. Never trust a guy with a name that's got two vowels and I'm not sure how to pronounce.
And what, the news story just comes out right around Thanksgiving, the time of Pi? I see what's going on here.
Now, there's a good chance it's pronounced like pay or something like that, and we're just fucking this up completely. So that part we might be off on, but I stand by everything else. And the thing that really kind of worries me, and it's not so okay. So what we're dealing with in reality is that everything you want to happen, all the supposed goals are the FCC regulations are working in the opposite direction. So you're basically just taking resources away from these companies, so they're not innovating as quickly as they would be if they weren't, paying all these compliance costs. And of course, it's nothing makes it harder for new companies to get into a market than a high regulatory burden. You know? And this is obvious when they see, it's like when you have Dodd-Frank and they're like, these companies are too big to fail. And then after you put in this giant regulation, the companies are way bigger. They're way bigger because the problem is that you have compliance in the name of, we don't want these companies to get too big, but who can afford the compliance? Only the big companies. So whatever problems there exist, and there are some problems with the internet where, like, sir, there's still some pretty rural areas where there aren't internet service providers in the country. That's a big problem. But you have to. This is my great. I loved what Milton Friedman said this on Free to Choose, the TV series, which was named after his book, or maybe the book was named after the TV series. I don't remember, but both very good. But he said this thing, which I think is a great line, where he goes to one guy who's arguing about government regulation, and he goes, "You're seeing," "You're seeing the hole in the barnyard door, and you're missing the barnyard door." And there's this thing where, like, you're seeing this tiny little problem, and you're missing the big picture. So yeah, are there some rural areas that don't have internet access in the country? Sure. But guess what areas used to not have internet access? All of them. You got to keep your eye on the prize here and what's going on. And the truth is, nobody can argue. This is just a fucking fact that for decades before net neutrality, internet access and speed was improving dramatically for ordinary people. That's the truth. What they were talking about was he goes, he was talking about how, America embraced capitalism and had, like the greatest success ever. And the guy goes, well, but there were regulations. There were regulations into the railroad industry and things like that. And he goes, yeah, you're seeing the hole in the barn door and you're missing the barn door. It's like, yes, there were some regulations here and there, and they're bad. And I disagree with them. But the truth is that we had a free market. We had no income tax, no Federal Reserve, very, very low government spending, very, very low government regulation. And we created the greatest country that's ever been created. We cultivated the greatest economy in the history of humanity. I mean, how can you cultivate something so great and have people see nothing but the flaws in it? It just seems like madness. So we'll see what happens, but it's like I don't, it's like if this thing does get repealed, it'll be really, it's like you feel like it'll be great because then it's like, oh, so when none of these nightmare scenarios come true in 5 years, oh, then you guys will all have to admit you're wrong, right? But it just doesn't fucking work that way. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, the Keynesians, right? The believers in John Maynard Keynes and Keynesian economics, they said that stagflation was impossible. That you could either have, an inflationary economy or you could have high unemployment. And the 70s actually disproved this. They disproved it. So all of the Keynesians, they said, well, we've converted to being good free market economists now, and we have to re-question everything. It's like, no, of course not. They just, conveniently ignore it and keep moving forward. And so when none of these nightmare scenarios come true, that's exactly what will happen, because most of these people, they're not dealing in reality. They're dealing in this religion, in this anti-capitalist religion. And, I wish people would kind of understand that it's like there are these places like Venezuela and North Korea that are hell on earth, and that can happen here too. And in fact, what we would consider hell on earth for human beings is much more the norm than it is the exception. This is how most of human history has been and how most of the world still is for people right now. And the reason why we've been able to escape that is because of freedom. And the reason why those hell on earths exist is because of the state. And I know people accuse libertarians of oversimplifying things, but this isn't oversimplifying something. This is the fucking truth. Some things in life are actually fairly simple. And there's a lot of complex ideas around them, but some things in life are fairly simple. Like, slavery is immoral. You could accuse the abolitionists of oversimplifying things, but they're 100% right. And, rape is bad. These are just, very, very simple things. But centralized authority, particularly of communications, I mean, it's an outrage. And these nightmare scenarios in the free market, it's like, they're all either like made up. They all fall into one of two categories. Okay, they're made up projections based on nothing, or they are seeing the hole in the barn door and missing the barn door. It's like saying like, oh, but this one internet service provider one time did threaten this one website with this, or one time they wrote that they would do this to Netflix or something else, But you're completely missing the big picture, which is like, what did these service providers actually do? They provided the greatest fucking service ever to fucking millions and millions of people. And for that, we're like, fuck them. Bring in the FCC. How fucking terrible is that? Like you were saying before, man, it's like they're the bad guys. The FCC is the bad guys. How could any young people not get this? And there's so much defenders of the status quo, like these like campus lefties, who go out there and say this thing like, like the whatever left-wing thing of the day, trans rights or whatever, or capitalism is bad or anything like that. It's like you go out there and you're taking the position that dominates the entire culture, that all of your professors agree with, that all of Hollywood agrees with, and all of the politicians, agree with. And you still get to feel kind of edgy. But you're just completely, it's completely the status quo. I mean, like, if somebody, were to get up in like a college somewhere and say, I think white people need to check their privilege. It's completely risk-free. Completely risk-free. You want to go take Ben Shapiro's position on a college campus, and you are like, you better be paying for $10,000 worth of security that night. Because that is a risky like you are in direct physical danger just from taking those positions. So when people have this opinion that they know, even if they want to pretend like they're being edgy, they know deep in their heart there's nothing risky about it. They don't worry. They don't worry about getting the FCC involved because they know they're not going to be the ones who are ever silenced. But for those of us out there who take some fucking ballsy positions, I mean, we get it real quick. We get real quick that I do not want any type of force ever being associated with communications. That should be an open, voluntary world, much like everything else. All right, I'm done. Another episode on net neutrality. I hope I didn't repeat myself too much from the first one. I think we covered some new shit. And I'm sure, we're going to end up talking a little bit more about this. I don't know if we'll do another full episode on it, but I'm sure we'll end up talking a little bit more about this because coming up in the next week or so, we're going to find out whether they're repealing the shit or whether they're actually not. And the only other thing that I would add is that even in this guy, even in Pi or Pei or Pei, whatever his name is, even in this guy's proposal, basically what he's saying is that there would be a requirement that internet service providers are transparent with what their practices are. So if any of this shit is being done, we all get to know about it. And it's so frustrating to me, man, that liberals don't, or I should never call them that because they have nothing to do with liberty, but these lefties don't understand the power that they have in their numbers. Like, it's like, okay, so let's say we did this on a market-based system, right? So some internet service provider could say, we're going to, because it's so popular and so many of our customers love it, we're going to continue the net neutrality rules voluntarily, right? And then every one of you left-wing people could send them money, send them support, sign up for their service. But of course, you guys don't want to do that. You guys don't actually want to do anything. But they could do that, and then some other company come out and not follow those rules. And they never look at like the voluntary possibilities without this shit. So they'll be like, well, we need the government coming in and inspecting, like restaurants and making sure that they're clean. And you're like, okay, well, if you had a market, right? Like if you had a free market, here's how shit like that would work. People are concerned about their food, about their food being, whatever, fucking not inspected, that they're going to get a lethal sandwich. This is what everyone's, big concern about. If libertarians got their way, we wouldn't figure out how to make a sandwich that doesn't kill you. So here's how it works. Some company comes in and they go, we're going to inspect these restaurants. And then a lot of restaurants who want your fucking business, because that's what businesses want, they'd be able to put that seal up. Hey, we were inspected by this company. We were there. Now, hey, you want to go over to that restaurant who wasn't inspected? Or you want to come here where you know the food's good? And this would be a great driver of business, and then people would be going to those businesses. And this is how the fucking market works, man. And then you have the choice. And you know what you get then is, number one, it's not horrifically immoral, where you put a gun to everyone's head and someone walks in like a fucking Nazi and charges a business thousands of dollars because they found a little speck of dust on their glass. I've seen this shit happen. It is legit. They are fucking Nazis, man. Those people get drunk on power. So you have none of that, because now it's a business. And you know how businesses tend to do things maybe 10,000 times more efficiently than the government. So you'd have them be far better at it. You'd have far cleaner restaurants, far better food, and you do it without fucking taxing everybody and wasting their money. And that's how the market would work. So we can achieve all these things without any type of fucking state interference. And I guess that's where I'll leave things for today. All right, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Continue to listen. All right. Peace. Hey, I just realized, too, I got to cut in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. But I got to do a plug for shows. We cut that in.